Ben 10's aliens come from worlds as strange as the powers they carry. These are the 10 most important planets in the franchise, and what each one actually produced. Let's break this down. Kinet. The atmosphere of Kinet does not permit stillness. The planet exists in a state of perpetual electromagnetic storm, its surface swept by wind systems so continuous and powerful that the concept of calm weather has no equivalent in the Kinet-Cellaran language, because the Kinet-Cellaran environment has never produced a situation that required the word. Every feature of the planet's surface, the terrain, the vegetation patterns, the distribution of resources, has been shaped by the assumption that everything on Kinet is always moving. The species this produced operates on the same principle. Kinet-Cellarans, the species XLR8 represents in the Omnitrix, evolve speed not as an advantage over other species, but as the baseline requirement for existence on a world that punished anything that stopped. Their tail stabilizers, their friction manipulation ability, their helmet visors that slam down automatically at high velocity, these are not combat adaptations. They are survival equipment for a planet that generates atmospheric conditions equivalent to living inside a sustained explosion. The franchise never showed Kinet in significant detail across the classic series, but the reboot's Alien World shorts and supplementary lore consistently described it as a world where the electromagnetic storm activity is so dense that conventional spacecraft navigation becomes unreliable in its upper atmosphere. Ships visiting Kinet require specialized shielding to approach. The Kinet-Cellarans do not notice. They were never built to stand still long enough to be bothered by the weather. Vulpin. The planet is a wasteland by every measurable environmental standard, and this is not the result of any catastrophe or neglect. Vulpin was always this way. The surface is covered in toxic sludge pools. The vegetation that survives does so through chemical resistance rather than photosynthesis in any form recognizable to Earth biology, and the atmospheric composition at ground level would be lethal to the majority of species in the Omnitrix database within minutes of exposure. The Vulpimancers, the species Wildmutt represents, evolved across millions of years inside these conditions and emerged as the dominant predator of an environment that had eliminated every alternative. Their eyes disappeared entirely because visual information is useless in an atmosphere this dense with particulate matter and chemical interference. Smell and sound provide more navigable data than light ever could in Vulpin's conditions. Their gill-like sensory organs along their jawline detect movement, chemical signatures, and air pressure changes with a precision that gives them a more complete picture of their immediate environment than sight would produce in the same space. The quills along their body surface aid sensory processing as well as physical defense. Vulpin is one of the few worlds in the franchise that is never presented as a potential destination worth visiting. No storyline brought the main cast there, no character expressed interest in experiencing it, and the show used its reputation as hostile and unpleasant as a consistent shorthand for explaining why Wildmutt functions the way he does. The planet produced exactly the creature that surviving it required. Lepidoptera, the entire surface of the planet is a swamp. Not a swamp continent, not a swamp biome within a larger geographical context. The entire planet, pole to pole, is a swamp ecosystem of layered wetland, dense organic growth, stagnant atmospheric moisture, and the particular quality of light that penetrates a permanent canopy and turns everything below it into something that smells exactly like what Stinkfly suggests. Lepidoptera, the earth butterfly genus the planet name references, implies a species that evolved through flight from something ground-based, and Lepidopterans follow the same logic. The swamp surface of their world is where the biological pressure that produced flight originated, where the competitive dynamics of a crowded, low-visibility environment selected for aerial mobility over terrestrial speed. Stinkfly's 4 wings, 4 independently focusing eyes, and corrosive gel projection all make direct sense as adaptations to a world where the ground is dangerous, visibility at surface level is poor, and offensive capability needs to function at range to compensate for the chaos of a dense organic environment. The stench is a biological weapon that doubles as territorial marking, a standard feature of swamp ecosystems where establishing spatial boundaries without physical confrontation is more energy efficient than fighting constantly. Lepidoptera received minimal direct lore in the classic series, but consistent environmental characterization. Every reference to the planet described it in terms that made the connection between its conditions and its dominant species immediate. The swamp built the insect. The insect carried the swamp's logic into every fight. Khoros. The planet is a desert. That description undersells what Khoros actually represents, because Khoros is not a desert the way Earth has deserts, regions of low precipitation within a larger ecological context. Khoros is a desert the way some planets are gas giants. It is that thing, completely, without meaningful alternative geography to provide relief or contrast. The available resources on Khoros are scarce relative to its population. Water is limited, shade is limited, food sources capable of sustaining a species as physically large as tetramans are distributed across a hostile surface that punishes anything not built to compete for them. The civilization this produced was organized entirely around combat as the primary mechanism for resource allocation, territorial definition, and social hierarchy. Not because the tetramans chose violence as a cultural value, but because the planet gave them no alternative framework for survival that worked better. Four Arms design is the direct physical output of this environment. Four muscular limbs built for grappling and striking, dense musculature capable of generating shock waves through ground impacts and arm claps, armored skin that treats incoming damage as an inconvenience rather than a deterrent. The alien world, short for the Tetramans, showed a society built around combat tournaments and strength hierarchies. A culture that would read as brutalist by most galactic standards and reads as perfectly logical the moment you understand what Khoros required of anything that wanted to survive on its surface. The desert did not make the Tetramans aggressive, it made aggression the only reliable answer to the questions the desert kept asking. Piscis. The planet is 98% water. The solid matter that comprises the remaining 2% exists entirely at Piscis's core, buried beneath an ocean that covers the entire surface to a depth that the franchise never quantified, but consistently implied was extreme enough to make the pressure at the lowest levels comparable to the geological forces inside a planet rather than within a body of water. The Piscis evoland species, Ripjaw's species, evolved in this environment as the dominant predator of an ocean world, which explains the luminescent lure, the jaw strength sufficient to bite through steel plating, the ability to convert lower body configuration between a swimming tail and functional legs depending on the immediate requirement. What makes Piscis thus relevant beyond its environmental specifications is a single plot point from Ultimate Alien that the original series never anticipated when it established the planet. Aggregor stole one of the components from the device that kept Piscis structurally stable. The planet does not hold itself together naturally. An engineered system exists specifically to maintain the integrity of a world composed almost entirely of water. And when Aggregor removed a piece of it as one step in his plan to reach the Forge of Creation, Piscis began to destabilize. The Piscis Valan Magister Petelidae, a plumber, and one of the franchise's recurring supporting characters, is from this world. When Aggregor threatened it, he was threatening the home of someone the audience knew. The planet that produced the least used alien in Ben's original roster turned out to contain a geopolitical vulnerability that a later villain specifically chose to exploit. The Anur system. The other civilizations in two galaxies refused to enter it. That detail, established in the franchise's lore and repeated in supplementary material, is the most efficient summary of what the Anur system represents as a location, a solar system so thoroughly defined by the species it contains that outside contact has been mutually rejected for as long as the system's inhabitants and their neighbors have been aware of each other. The system is threaded together by massive cobweb-like structures whose origin and function the franchise never explained, surrounding an antimatter sun small enough to produce minimal light, giving the entire system a perpetual dim quality that the horror-themed species it houses have adapted to entirely. Anur Phaedos is technically not a planet but a pocket dimension accessible from the system. The Ectonurites world, perpetually dark, composed of floating stone formations and electrical structures with portals leading into layered tunnels throughout. Anur Transil is the system's largest and most Earth-adjacent world, held together literally by stitches. The planet's landmasses have gaps between them, its core visible through the continental separations, and its steampunk technological aesthetic is the Transilians' engineering response to living on a world that physically requires maintenance to stay in one piece. Luna Lobo, Anur Transil's moon, is where the Loboans evolved their sonic howl as the primary ecological weapon in an environment where the moon's gravity and atmosphere created conditions suited to it. Anur Kufos, home of the Thep Kufans, was the evolutionary origin point for a species whose biology is composed entirely of animate wrapping material. The system produced every classic monster archetype: ghost, Frankenstein's monster, werewolf, mummy, vampire, from environmental conditions that the franchise never fully explained and did not need to, because the results were visually self-evident. Arborea. The planet no longer exists. The Great One, a massive alien entity whose precise nature the franchise left ambiguous, consumed Arborea entirely, leaving the Arborean Pelorota species without a homeworld and with a very specific relationship to the cosmic scale threats that the Omnitrix roster occasionally had to address. Cannonbolt species survived the destruction of their world because enough individuals were elsewhere when it happened, but the planet itself was gone, reduced to the kind of absence that does not leave ruins because consumption at that scale does not produce wreckage. The detail that makes Arborea's destruction specifically meaningful in the context of Ben's Omnitrix is that Cannonbolt was not supposed to be one of the original 10 aliens. The development history of the series confirms that Cannonbolt was intended as one of the base 10 transformations before being cut and replaced with Ghost Freak, which means he appeared in the show's opening montage throughout Season 1 as Alien Number 9 before his formal in-series debut in The Big Tick. The episode that introduced him was the episode that also introduced the Great One and established what had happened to Arborea. Cannonbolt's first canonical appearance was simultaneously his species' eulogy. The Arborean Pelorotas, who survived, relocated to Vulpin, the toxic wasteland that had already produced wild mutt, making them arguably the only species in the franchise's lore to have their homeworld destroyed and then chosen to rebuild on one of the most hostile alternatives available. Their armor evolved for impact and rolling. A toxic wasteland is still preferable to nothing. Galvan Prime and Galvan B. The most technologically advanced civilization in the universe built its headquarters on a planet whose name the franchise attached to its smartest alien and then built a second story on the moon next door by accident. Galvan Prime is the homeworld of the Galvans, the species gray matter represents, the species Azimuth belongs to, the species that produce the Omnitrix, the Ultimatrix, and most of the significant technological infrastructure the franchise references when it needs something to be the pinnacle of scientific achievement. The Galvans are physically small and biologically fragile in ways that their intellectual output makes irrelevant. A species that produces azimuth does not need physical capability because it produces tools that replace the need for it entirely. Galvan Prime itself was attacked by malware during Omniverse's backstory. The corrupted galvanic mechamorph attempted to corrupt the planet's central systems, which would have given him control over the most significant technological infrastructure in the Milky Way galaxy. Galvan B is the moon that created galvanic mechamorphs, upgrade species, through an experiment Azimuth was conducting to make the moon habitable by binding self-replicating nanotechnology to its mineral composition. The nanotechnology did not produce a habitable environment. It produced a sentient species that had not been planned, designed, or anticipated, and that emerged as fully formed living organisms from what had been an engineering project. Galvan B became the home of a species that the galaxy's most advanced civilization accidentally willed into existence while working on an unrelated problem. Azimuth considered this one of his greatest accomplishments. The galvanic mechamorphs were never consulted about the origin story he assigned them. Petropia. Vilgax destroyed it. He commissioned the weapon from Tetrax, one of the most accomplished Petrosapien warriors of his generation, without telling Tetrax what the weapon would be used for, and Tetrax delivered it without understanding that he was handing over the mechanism of his own world's extinction. Petropia was a crystal world in the literal sense. The planet's surface, atmosphere, and geological composition were primarily crystalline, producing a landscape that refracted light across its entire visible surface and housed a civilization built from the same material as its inhabitants. Petrosapiens could grow new structures from their own bodies, repair damaged architecture by contributing their own crystalline mass, and defend their world through a biology that was architecturally identical to the infrastructure they were protecting. None of that mattered when Vilgax used Tetrax's weapon. The planet shattered. The crystal that made it a world became the debris field that marked where it had been. And Tetrax spent the following period of his life carrying the specific guilt of a person who had not understood the contract he was fulfilling until after the execution was complete. The original series established Petropia as destroyed. Alien Force restored it, A Petropia backup crystal that Azimuth had preserved became the instrument of reconstruction, and Ben used it to rebuild the planet in the episode Secret of Chromastone. A world that had been absent from the Omnitrix roster's backstory for the entirety of the original series was suddenly reinstated, its population restored, Tetrax's decades of guilt addressed in a single afternoon. The crystal planet survived Vilgax. It did not survive easily. Pyros, it is not a planet. The franchise refers to it as a planet because the species that inhabits it functions as though it were one, and because the Omnitrix database categorizes it as a homeworld rather than a stellar body. What Pyros actually is in astronomical terms is a star, a living mass of plasma and nuclear fire that a species of similarly constituted beings evolved inside, on, and around in a way that makes the conventional distinction between inhabiting a planet and inhabiting a star irrelevant because the star itself is the habitat. Pyronites, Heatblast species, are living magma wrapped in volcanic rock capable of generating and controlling fire as an expression of their basic biology rather than a learned skill or a technological function. They did not develop fire use. They are fire, emerge from an environment that is itself fire, on a scale that makes the concept of a world made of flame less metaphorical and more literally descriptive than any other entry on this list. The star Pyros occupies the Pyros system and functions as a homeworld in the sense that Pyronites can exist there, interact there, and maintain whatever social structures the species has developed without requiring any technology to survive an environment that would incinerate every other species in the Omnitrix roster on contact. Heatblast was the first alien Ben ever became. The franchise chose to open with the transformation into a living fire creature from a living fire world, which was either deliberate symbolism about the scale of what the Omnitrix contained or simply the most visually dramatic option available. Either way, every other world on this list exists in a universe where the first world introduced was a star.